What happens when a shy, bullied teenager with a once-in-a-generation voice walks onto a national stage, stuns millions, and still loses to a dancing dog? Sounds unbelievable, right? But that's exactly what happened to Jonathan Antoine. And the deeper you go into his story, the more unexpected it becomes. Because this isn't just about talent or fame. It's about survival. So how did it all begin? Back in March 2012, a 17-year-old Jonathan stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage with his singing partner, Charlotte. They looked like a typical teenage duo. Nothing flashy. Nothing special, at least, that's what everyone thought. Even Simon Cowell didn't hide his doubts. His expression said it all. You could feel the skepticism in the room. And for Jonathan, a kid who had already faced years of bullying, this moment could have gone very differently. But then, he started singing. The first note changed everything. The room fell silent. The judges froze. And within seconds, the same people who doubted him were completely stunned. His voice wasn't just good. It was powerful, emotional, unforgettable. By the time the performance ended, the audience was on its feet. Simon Cowell even compared him to Luciano Pavarotti. Think about that for a second. From being dismissed to being compared to one of the greatest voices in history. But here's the twist. What happened next shocked everyone. Despite the viral moment and overwhelming praise, Jonathan and Charlotte didn't win. They came second, beaten by a dancing dog act. It sounds almost unreal. How does a voice like that lose? Jonathan later admitted the moment hit him hard, even if he kept it together on stage. So was that the end of his story? Or just the beginning of something bigger? Because here's the thing, losing didn't slow him down. In fact, it opened even bigger doors. Within days, Simon Cowell signed the duo to a £1 million record deal. Their debut album took off quickly, climbing the charts and reaching audiences around the world. Suddenly, Jonathan wasn't just a contestant. He was a global name. Tours, interviews, TV specials, it all came fast. Almost too fast. And that's where things started to shift. Because behind the success, cracks were already forming. The question is, what caused them? As their second album came together, the differences between Jonathan and Charlotte became harder to ignore. Jonathan wanted to stay true to classical music. Charlotte leaned toward musical theatre. Neither was wrong. But they were no longer moving in the same direction. And when you mix that with the pressure of sudden fame at such a young age, something has to give. So what happens when two rising stars stop sharing the same dream? In 2014, the answer came. They split. Fans were stunned. After everything they had built together, it was over. Officially, it was a mutual decision. Both wanted to explore solo careers. But behind the scenes, the distance between them grew. They stopped talking. Two close friends who had once shared the same stage, now living completely separate lives. And it left one big question hanging. Could Jonathan really succeed on his own? To understand that, you have to go back. Way before the spotlight. Before the applause. Back to a young boy dealing with something much darker. Jonathan's childhood wasn't easy. He faced constant bullying from a very young age. Not just teasing, real, painful isolation. He was targeted for his weight, his appearance, just for being different. And when you're that young, those things stick. So how did he cope? He turned to music. It became his escape. His safe space. And then, at age 11, something changed. He met a teacher who saw what others didn't. She recognized his voice. His potential. And slowly, things began to shift. The same boy who was once bullied started gaining confidence. By his early teens, he was already performing at a high level, even earning top scores at music festivals. But even with that success, the emotional scars didn't just disappear. And that would matter later more than anyone expected. After the split, Jonathan stepped into the spotlight alone. No partner. No safety net. Just his voice. And the pressure was intense. People wondered if he could really carry it on his own. But when his first solo album dropped, it answered that question immediately. It hit #1 on the classical charts. Just like that, he proved he belonged. He wasn't just part of a duo. He was the real deal. And then something even more surprising happened. One of the greatest opera singers in the world, Placido Domingo, personally invited him to perform. That's not something that happens by accident. It was recognition at the highest level. Jonathan toured internationally, released more music, and built a strong career. On the outside, it looked like everything was finally falling into place. But behind the scenes, things were still complicated. Because success doesn't erase the past. So what was he still dealing with? Jonathan later opened up about his struggles with depression. The years of bullying had left deep marks. Even at the height of his success, he was fighting battles most people couldn't see. At one point, it became so overwhelming that he had to cancel a major performance. Imagine reaching one of the biggest stages in the world and not being able to step on it. That's how heavy it was. And it didn't stop there. He also went through a difficult personal relationship that added even more emotional strain. It was a tough period. But through it all, one thing remained constant: his family. They stood by him when everything else felt uncertain. And slowly, Jonathan began to shift from just surviving to speaking out. He started using his story to help others, especially around mental health and bullying. But even then, there was still one piece missing. Something that would change how he saw his entire life. In 2022, Jonathan received an autism diagnosis. And suddenly, things started to make sense. The way he experienced the world. The struggles with social situations. The deep connection to music. It all clicked into place. But imagine living your whole life one way, and then realizing there's a completely different explanation behind it. That kind of realization can be overwhelming. So what do you do with it? For Jonathan, it became a turning point. Not a limitation, but an understanding. A new way to see himself. And that clarity didn't just stay internal. It showed up in other ways too. Around the same time, he began a major transformation in his physical health. He focused on small, consistent habits. Walking every day. Changing his relationship with food. And over time, the results were dramatic. He lost a significant amount of weight. But more importantly, he gained something else: control. Confidence. A sense of balance he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about appearance. It was about feeling better. Stronger. And for the first time in a long time, truly comfortable in his own skin. So where does that leave him now? Today, Jonathan is still creating music, still performing, and still evolving. He may not dominate headlines like he did in 2012, but that doesn't mean he disappeared. Far from it. He built a steady, meaningful career on his own terms. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the viral moment. Not the loss. But everything that came after. Because when you look back, it's not about losing to a dancing dog. It's about what he did next. The resilience. The growth. The refusal to let the past define him. And maybe that's the question this story leaves you with. What matters more, how you start, or how you keep going when everything gets hard?